Hello, I'm Jeff Cavins, and today we're looking at the readings for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time. I'm going to talk about John chapter 6 this week, which is the Bread of Life discourse. Very, very famous. And there's a couple of things that I want to bring out here that I think are really life-transforming if we can get a hold of them. I'm going to read a little bit of it to you. Many of his disciples, when they heard it, said, "This is a hard saying." And of course, he just told them previously that he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. And that sounded like a very hard saying, needless to say. It's a hard saying, who can listen to it? But Jesus, knowing in himself that his disciples murmured at it, said to them, "Do you take offense at this? Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending where he was before? It is the Spirit that gives life, the flesh is of no avail. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. But there are some of you that do not believe." For Jesus knew from the first who those were that did not believe, and who it was that would betray him. And he said, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless it is granted him by the Father." Now, one point I want to bring up before we move on from there for just a moment is that Jesus brings up something really important. He's talking about the Eucharist. He's talking about giving his body and blood, soul and divinity to us, the greatest source of grace. And yet in the middle of it, he says that he knew from the first, he knew right away, long ago, who those were that did not believe and who was going to betray him. Now, what I think about this that's interesting is that Jesus is still willing to give himself completely to Judas. He knew which one was going to betray him, and he knew that Peter was going to betray him as well. Yet he gave himself completely. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, I bring it up because so often in our lives when we sin and we really, really blow it, we want to rebound. We want to get right with the Lord again. But there's something in our nature that says, he's not going to accept me. It's not going to be the same as it was before. Maybe he will withhold his grace. Maybe I will not be counted as among his disciples in the modern setting. My friend, I want you to know that if you have sinned, even if you have grave sin and you've gone to confession, I want you to know that Jesus is still offering his life completely to you in the same way that he would offer it to a pope or a saint. He's offering his life to you. And so don't let that discourage you. Know that Jesus' love is completely in your direction. Moving on in the reading, after this, many of his disciples drew back and no longer walked with him. And that was over the issue of his saying that his body and blood were to be eaten and consumed. Jesus said to the 12, "Will you also go away?" Now, I love the response here from Peter. He answered and said, "Lord, to whom shall we go?" That's a good question, right? If you're going to leave the Catholic Church, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go that you can receive the body and blood, soul and divinity of Jesus? "You have the words of eternal life," Peter said, "and we have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God." And Jesus answered them, "Did I not choose you, the 12, and one of you is a devil?" So back again, a reminder that in the Eucharist, Jesus is giving himself completely to us. And this is the key to life, is the Eucharist. Now, I want to bring you back just for a moment to Genesis. In Genesis chapter 3, we see that there is another special tree in Genesis. We have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which Adam and Eve ate from, but the tree of life, that was another tree that after they had sinned, after they were put out of the garden, there was a guard put over the tree of life. They didn't have access to it. Now, what's interesting is if you go to modern-day Israel, no doubt you're going to visit the upper room. And in the upper room, there is a symbolic tree. And people ask, what's that tree doing in the upper room? Well, the upper room is where the first Eucharist was celebrated. And the church fathers have told us that in the Eucharist, we now have access to the tree of life that was mentioned back in Genesis 3:24, where there was a guard put around it. Guess what? No guard anymore. We have free access now to the life of God through the Eucharist. And so I would conclude by just reminding you once again, if you have sinned, if you feel like you have let the Lord down, do not retreat from the Eucharist, because that's the source of life. And Jesus is not withholding himself from you. He wants to continue to give himself to you in the holy sacrifice of the Mass, his body and blood, soul and divinity.